This is my review of the Yongnuo YN 50mm f1.8, starting off with price. Now, I only found this on Amazon and B&H Photo. It was $82, although when you do type in Yongnuo YN 50mm f1.8, Canon EF or Nikon, whatever you're using, into a search bar, you will see some other options. You can find this lens on eBay. I don't know if it was new or used, but I saw one on eBay for about 80 bucks. Saw a couple of used ones on there for about 60, 50, somewhere around there. So keep that in mind. Take that into consideration if you plan on purchasing this lens. As far as the construction of this lens goes, it is fully plastic with no weather sealing and no image stabilization. There is autofocus, and it takes a 52mm filter thread. As for the weight, it is 5 ounces with the lens caps on and 4.1 ounces with the lens caps off. Now, something I do want to mention about this lens specifically is it does not have a metal mounting ring. So if you are interested, I would choose the Mark II version of this lens from Yongnuo. It takes a 58mm filter thread. So take that into consideration if you plan on purchasing this lens and you already have filters that are 52mm. If you do plan on purchasing the Mark II instead, you will have to upgrade those to a 58mm. As for the aperture range, it goes from f1.8 to f22. Like I mentioned, there is no image stabilization on this lens, so if you plan on using it, make sure you're either using a tripod or you have a steady hand. As far as the minimum focusing distance goes, Yongnuo claims that it is 0.45 meters or 1.5 feet. Equivalently, that is 17.72 inches. In my testing, the minimum focusing distance that I got was 17.25 inches, so slightly better than what Yongnuo had claimed. As for bokeh, on the top of the image, you will have some cat eye shaped, almost oblong shaped bokeh, but towards the center or bottom of the lens, they look a little bit more round. So I'm not really 100% sure what's going on with that, but that's what you get. As for sun stars and long exposure, as for sun stars go, you get a nice 14-point star on further away objects or further away lights. The sun stars look a little bit more uniform. On objects that are a little bit closer, they almost look like they're spread out or blotchy or even split into two, like on the headlights on this car. As for astrophotography, you will notice some chromatic aberration on some of the brighter stars in the night sky. As well, you will get some chroma smearing. It's not as bad as some of the other Yongnuo lenses that I have tested, but this one is no exception to those, so you still get the chroma smearing in the corners. And moving on to the lens test, starting off at f1.8, there is vignetting, there is a slight barrel distortion. The center is sharp and the corners are soft, from what I'm assuming is possibly the barrel distortion, although this is a fairly soft lens. There is also chromatic aberration and ghosting on the image. By around f3.5, the vignette has disappeared. By f5, the corners have sharpened up. Around f8, the image is sharp corner to corner. And at f18, the image starts to soften due to diffraction in my testing. Now, for the most part, by f3.2, the chromatic aberration or green and purple color fringing has disappeared. As for the autofocus on this lens, if you plan on using this for video, just make sure that you are either booming a microphone or using a wireless lav mic. So this way you're not recording directly into the camera, because you will pick up any sort of autofocusing noise. It is not quiet by any means, and for photography, I feel it was even louder than autofocus through video. As for working against bright lights, this lens does not do very well, although it's not terrible. I have seen worse, so take that into consideration. I feel that there is nowhere to mount a lens hood, so if you're using this outside during the day and recording video, just make sure that you're under some shade tree or there's something blocking the lens, because you will get flaring, so take that into account. And my final thoughts. For the price, I don't think that this is a terrible lens. It's not the greatest, and I will specifically say that if you're planning on purchasing a 50mm f1.8, I would highly recommend either their second Mark II version of their YN 50mm, or I would buy a used Canon 50mm f1.8, as that's probably going to be the sharpest 50mm lens, especially if you're on Canon. As far as Nikon and Sony goes, unfortunately, I don't have a Nikon or a Sony camera, so I can't test out those lenses at the moment, maybe in the future. Now, like I mentioned, this lens is somewhat soft, so take that into consideration. I mainly use manual focus, and I manual focus through the LCD, so this way I can pull focus and make sure that it is 100% on the image. Especially if you're wide open, this is going to be a very hard lens to get 100% in camera, because the image is so soft that when you're focusing, it'll go in and out very easily, and it's very hard to hit that center sharpness with this lens. You could use the autofocus. It's not terrible, but it also isn't something to write home about. With some of the other Yongnuo lenses, when the autofocus hits, it actually does a fairly decent job, and when it doesn't hit, you are going to notice it. I actually ended up scrapping around 10 to 15 photos from this lens when I went out to do some street photography with it, because they were just not in focus, even with pulling manually through the LCD or using autofocus. So take that into consideration when you're purchasing this lens, or if you're considering on purchasing this lens. Like I mentioned, I would probably opt and spend the extra, I don't know, 13 or 15 bucks for the Yongnuo YN 50mm Mark II, or even their 35. As for this lens, I would say if you do plan on purchasing this one specifically, I would maybe buy it from Amazon and test it out first for yourself, just to see if you like it and if it is giving you possibly the issues that I had. I would say for a budget lens, it's not terrible. It'll get you in the ballpark, but honestly, like I mentioned, I would either go for their YN 50mm Mark II or a Canon 50mm f1.8, as those I feel are better options than this Yongnuo YN 50mm Mark I. If you guys like this video, go ahead, give it a thumbs up, give it a like. If you didn't like this video, also give it a thumbs up. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit all the buttons. I'm Jordan, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.